It's not so difficult to imagine. A man has worked all night, caught nothing, is discouraged, maybe is intrigued also by what he has heard. He has heard Jesus speak of God's kingdom, of peace, of joy, of healing, of forgiveness. Maybe all kinds of questions are running through his mind. Is this guy for real? Is there substance to what he is saying? Maybe he's a little bit skeptical, but he's interested. And Jesus asks him for a human favor. That's how it starts. We see there's a progression in the text. First of all, a human favor. Can you lend me your boat? It's going to be easier to speak to the large crowd from the boat. The crowd's on the shore, Jesus in the boat. It sounds better. Jesus finishes talking, but maybe he's perceived that there's an openness in this man Simon. And so he continues. He asks him for something a little bit more than a human favor. Throw out your nets, once again. We've worked all night, it's not worked. He asks him for something more. Trust in me. Throw out your nets. Even if you are discouraged, even if you've already tried very hard and it's not worked. Simon accepts. Throws out his nets again. Fantastic catch of fish. Can't even pull it in by himself, he needs help. What's his reaction going to be? He could say to Jesus, could you come back tomorrow? This is great. No? Huh? But he doesn't. He says, go away from me. Literally, you could almost say, get out of my life. Very surprising reaction, because he knows it's not about success, but it's about being in God's presence. A little bit like Isaiah in the first reading. The terror of being in God's presence. And he's afraid. He's afraid. And that's what Jesus has to talk to now. He has to address his fear. Almost everyone is afraid when God calls. Almost everyone thinks there must be some kind of mistake. You cannot possibly be interested in me. If you really knew who I am, you would ask someone else. But Jesus sees something in Simon that is more than his sinfulness. Simon sees practically only his sinfulness. He thinks that's the most important part of his life. That's what characterizes him. I'm a sinful man. That's what he says. Go away from me, I'm a sinful man. Jesus sees something else. He sees what God can do with this. Doesn't mean he's not a sinner. Doesn't mean there's no sin in his life. But he sees something more fundamental, something more real maybe than his sin. So do not be afraid. And we are told that at that moment, Simon, who will soon be called Peter, has the courage to leave everything. It's wonderful how the text is vague. What does it mean, he left everything? I can imagine that he left his boat, that he left his nets, his fishing equipment, maybe his family, to follow Jesus. But isn't there something more? Didn't Simon have to leave something else behind? Maybe he had to leave behind also a certain self-image. I'm not capable of doing God's work. That's the self-image he had. Someone who is not able. He had to leave that behind also in order to follow Christ. He had to venture into the unknown, receive an identity that he could not give himself. Kind of like that part. I think we all like that part of this text where Jesus says, put out into the deep. Stop hugging the shore, but venture into the deep water. You can't run back to the shore. You can't even swim back to the shore. Go out towards the unknown. And that's the real challenge. Do we accept that God calls us to something unknown to us, something that's going to be a challenge, something that we're not familiar with, that will maybe give us a new identity, just like Simon will receive a new name, Peter? Do we accept that? Or do we listen to our fears? Do we let our fears guide us and restrict us and paralyze us? Maybe that's the question that we could think about this morning. Am I going to listen to my fears, allow my fears to guide my life, my fears of rejection, of failure, fear of my weakness? Or will I allow something else to guide me? Our founder at Taizé, Brother Roger, had hesitated about being a brother, starting a religious community, thought of being a writer. He liked literature, novels. He thought of being a writer, and he became a brother. He started the Taizé community, but he kept his love for words, kept his love for writing. And there's one wonderful sentence that I want to leave you with that he wrote. It's an unfinished sentence. Brother Roger liked unfinished sentences. Not because he didn't know how to complete the sentence, but I think he wanted people to think. He didn't want to tell people what to do. God doesn't always tell us what to do. He lets us figure it out. But he hints at something. He opens a way. He says, this way is open. He hints at the fact that this way is open. So Brother Roger wrote this wonderful sentence. If a trusting heart were at the beginning of everything, ... And Brother Roger doesn't say what would happen if a trusting heart were at the beginning of everything. But he would like the reader, he would like us all to think, what would happen if I based my decisions not on my fears, but on trust in Christ? How would that change my way of approaching others, of being approached by others? How would that change my way of making decisions, my initiatives? What would I dare to do if I didn't listen to my fear of failure? So, if a trusting heart were at the beginning of everything, we would be a little bit like Peter. We could maybe leave behind a self-image, leave behind what tells us you are not able, you cannot, you don't have the power. Maybe we would venture also out into the deep with Christ.